Get ready for a reality check. Ancient Greece might have been the hotbed of democracy, art, philosophy, and innovation, but scratch beneath the surface and it's a whole different story. This was the land where Aristotle and Plato revolutionized thinking, yet slavery was an everyday norm. The architecture that still leaves us in awe today came with a hefty price. Debt, inequality, and social hierarchy ruled supreme. And let's not forget the harsh environment and diseases that made life a constant struggle. So, buckle up as we dive into the untold history of ancient Greece, the good, the bad, and the brutal. Let's set the record straight. Ancient Greece was not as free and equal as you might have thought. Slavery was rampant, with Athens alone boasting an astonishing 60,000 to 80,000 enslaved people in just the 4th and 5th century BC. That's roughly more than half of its entire population. If you looked around any given household, it's likely that at least 3 slaves were hard at work behind the scenes. This was the harsh reality of daily life in ancient Greece. Get ready for a jaw-dropping revelation about ancient Sparta. In this unforgiving society, state-owned Helot slaves outnumbered free Spartans by a staggering 21 ratio. These indentured servants toiled away in the fields, with the government claiming a massive chunk of their hard-earned harvests. This unique setup allowed many young Spartan men to focus solely on becoming elite warriors, ultimately crafting one of history's most feared militaries. However, the treatment of Helots was brutally harsh. Constant beatings were used as a tool to maintain control and crush any hint of rebellion. In fact, ancient historian Myron of Priene recorded that these slaves were subjected to a predetermined number of lashings every year, just to remind them of their enslaved status. The picture of ancient Sparta is one of discipline, strength, and unapologetic oppression. Let's take a look at ancient Athens, but beware, we're about to enter a world where whips were just as common for slaves as they were in Sparta. Even here, in what was considered one of the most advanced democracies, corporal punishment was seen as an everyday reality for enslaved individuals. In fact, Athenian leader Solon once declared that a slave's entire body is held accountable for their mistakes, and physical discipline was often the go-to consequence. But how did people end up in this situation? You could be born into slavery, known as chattel slavery, or you might have been caught in the crossfire of war and sold off to the highest bidder. The harsh truth is that ancient societies like Athens were built on a foundation of enslaved labor, and it shaped every aspect of their culture and society. You thought being a free citizen in ancient Athens meant you were safe. Think again. In this society, debt enslavement was real. If you got deep into financial trouble with your landlord, you could find yourself sold into slavery, forced to work off your debt without pay. It sounds like a nightmare scenario from a history book, but it was a harsh reality for many Athenians. And that's not all. Athens had some of the strictest laws back in the 7th century BC. Stealing just a simple cabbage could land you a death sentence. But then something changed around 620. 1 BCA. Draco's new written constitution revolutionized the legal system, replacing an ancient oral law tradition with a more structured code of rules that we'd recognize today as the foundation of modern justice. Imagine living in ancient Athens without a clear justice system. No set rules, just an endless cycle of revenge and retaliation as victims sought their own brand of justice. This Wild West-like atmosphere led to generations-long feuds that nobody could escape. But things took a dark turn when the elite aristocracy twisted these laws for their own gain, creating a society where only they held power. The people cried out for change, but what they got was a system just as flawed. Draco's harsh laws doled out brutal punishments like enslavement and death for even small crimes, making life in Athens feel more like a never-ending nightmare than ever before. Fast forward to ancient Athens and the groundbreaking but misguided attempt at fairness. Draco's infamous written laws, known as the Draconian Constitution. This supposedly historic change was authored by an often overlooked aristocrat named Draco, but unfortunately, it only widened the gap between the wealthy elite and the common folk. Here's why. It solidified a system where debtors could be enslaved if they couldn't pay their landowners, trapping them in a cycle of servitude. Not to mention, only those wielding power through land or weapons were granted any say in government. The rest, effectively voiceless. And don't even get me started on the punishments. Some were shockingly disproportionate for the crimes committed. Get ready for a jaw-dropping twist in ancient Athens' story. Draco's drastic laws were so harsh that people actually called them draconian, and not in a good way. For instance, stealing could land you the death penalty, but apologizing to the family of someone you accidentally killed, you'd be free to go. These extreme rules didn't last long. By 594 BC, just a few decades later, the legendary lawmaker Solon stepped in, scrapped them, and introduced much more balanced laws. Meanwhile, Athens was gearing up for battle. Despite their love for democracy and philosophy, war remained an integral part of Greek culture. By around 500 BC, they started heavily relying on foreign mercenaries to fight their wars. Let's take a step back and dive into ancient Greece's wild side war. Before relying on mercenaries, regular citizens were the ones doing the fighting. We're talking about your average farmers and laborers who'd be called up to join militias part-time during archaic times, 800–500 BC. Yep, you read that right. If you weren't a warrior, you were probably forced into battle. Summer was prime time for Greek city-state rivalries to clash, but once the dust settled, the surviving fighters would pack their swords and get back to work, or more importantly, harvest their crops. This on-again, off-again approach made warfare pretty unpredictable and rough around the edges. Now, let's talk about the not-so-glamorous side of being an ancient Greek warrior: equipment costs. Poor citizens often had to foot the bill for their own gear, making them sitting ducks in battle with little protection. On the other hand, if you were a bit wealthier, you could invest in quality armor inherited from your family or purchased with your hard-earned cash and become a powerful hoplite, an infantryman packing spears, shields, and body armor. By 600 BC, these heavily armed foot soldiers became the backbone of Greek warfare. But let's shift gears to ancient Greek beauty standards. Little did they know that their makeup routine could be downright deadly. Women often used lead-based cosmetics on their skin, likes. Get ready for a shock. Ancient Greek beauty secrets were more like a recipe for disaster. The word cosmetics itself comes from the Greek term kosmika, but don't let that fool you. It wasn't just about looking good back then. Women, and even some men, used makeup to accentuate their features. But little did they know that lead was their go-to ingredient. Talk about a toxic trend. The wealthy and the not-so-wealthy alike thought lead paste made them look more radiant, but in reality, it caused severe skin disfigurement, scarring, and even life-threatening diseases. Who knew ancient Greek glam squad could be so hazardous? You won't believe how ancient Greeks took their beauty game to another level. Literally at the cost of their health, they'd keep layering on that toxic lead paste to cover up its destructive effects, creating a vicious cycle of damage and desperation. But here's the kicker: while they were busy trying to look flawless, a real-life deadly plague was looming over them in Athens around 430 BC. It's estimated that 1 out of every 3 people living there didn't make it. Talk about a grim reality check. The cause remains a mystery, but theories range from typhus and the flu to even Ebola. Can you imagine? While they were worried about acne and wrinkles, these Greeks had way more pressing concerns. Get ready for a shocking blast from the past. The ancient Greeks' beauty disaster wasn't just skin deep. According to historian Thucydides, that mysterious plague might have started in Africa and spread like wildfire through the Persian Empire, eventually striking down nearly 100,000 people in Athens. The symptoms were straight out of a horror story: fever, swollen eyes, and blood oozing from their mouths. No wonder it was a chaotic nightmare for the city. And if that wasn't enough, they had to deal with the Spartan siege on top of all this. Athens' golden age was officially over, and in 25 years, the city would be swallowed up by its powerful rival Sparta. Talk about a devastating beauty blowback. Buckle up for the ancient world's most epic disaster: the Bronze Age collapse. If you were chillin' in Greece back in 1177 BC, your chances of survival weren't looking great. Starvation or pirate attacks were basically a 1-2 punch to the gut. Suddenly, some of the coolest civilizations around the Mediterranean, the Mycenaeans, Egyptians, Hittites, Babylonians, and Minoans, all went from boom to bust. These ancient powerhouses had it all: sick architecture, thriving economies, and epic overseas trade. But then poof, it's like they vanished into thin air. Now historians are scratching their heads, trying to figure out what caused this massive collapse. Some theories point to a 300-year drought that turned the region into a barren wasteland, causing widespread famine and chaos. Talk about a dark age. The Bronze Age collapse. It's a wild ride full of famines, wars, and epic battles. When food is scarce, things tend to get ugly, and that's exactly what happened here. These ancient civilizations started fighting each other for the last crust, slowly tearing themselves apart. But wait, there's more. Around this time, we've got these enigmatic sea peoples making waves in the Mediterranean. They're like the pirates of the ancient world, leaving behind only cryptic carvings and written accounts of their raids on major port cities. Theories are that they took advantage of the drought-weakened empires, swooping in to pillage and destroy. Talk about a devastating 1-2 punch. Unfortunately, we don't have much concrete evidence of these sea peoples, but historians believe they played a huge role in the chaos and destruction that swept the region. Let's dive into ancient Greek medicine. It was a game changer, but still had some serious ancient vibes going on. Before the 5th century BC, illnesses were all about the gods. If you got sick or worse, it was divine punishment, and if you recovered, it was pure luck from above. But as time rolled around to 500 BC, things started getting a bit more sophisticated. The line between science and religion began to blur, with doctors and philosophers like Hippocrates starting to take a more rational approach to healthcare. It's all about that sweet spot where ancient wisdom meets the dawn of modern medicine. Meet the goddess of ancient Greek medicine. But don't get too excited, there's a catch. She's not a real goddess. We actually have to talk about the blurry lines between reality and myth back then. But what's for sure is that anyone could claim to be a doctor in ancient Greece. No qualifications needed. Just think of it like an ancient medical Wild West, where anyone with some know-how or a wild idea could hang up their shingle as a healer. And speaking of wild ideas, bloodletting was all the rage back then. Yes, you read that right, these ancient Greeks loved giving patients treatments that involved cutting them open to let out bad blood. Who knew being sick would feel like a vampire's worst nightmare? Get ready for a mind-blowing ancient medical theory that wasn't exactly lull-inducing. Meet humorism, the idea that your body's made up of 4 fluids, or humors, and it's all about balance. Think of it like a delicate seesaw when blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm are in harmony. You're good to go. But if one of them tips the scales, watch out, illness strikes. And it gets even weirder, because temperature played a huge role in humorism too. So, if you were feeling fiery or hot-headed, it was probably yellow bile running amok, while a cold soup might just be the culprit behind your stuffy nose and sluggish vibe. This ancient Greek approach to health might sound a bit crazy now, but it was their go-to guide for staying healthy, and they stuck by it for centuries. You won't believe what your ancestors thought about their local weather. If you lived in a city that got pummeled by cold winds, it was like, oh no, lung disease is coming for us. But if scorching hot gusts blew through town, everyone's tummy troubles were about to get real. And here's the kicker, this crazy theory hung around way longer than you'd think. Humorism was still being used by docs all over the globe until the mid-1800s, when germ theory came along and completely flipped the script. So, while ancient Greece might be famous for its epic achievements, life back then, not so glamorous. It was tough, grueling, and unfortunately, pretty short-lived. That's a wrap on today's mind-blowing fact about ancient Greece. What's the next historical adventure you're craving? Should we explore the mysterious pyramids, uncover